The glass doors of Kellerman Pharmaceuticals hissed open, admitting the Chicago cold, but not before Arthur Thorne's sneer cut deeper. "Is this your husband, Sarah? Does he even have a jaw?" he asked, not quite looking at me, my muddy boots frozen to the polished marble floor. My wife's face, usually so composed, crumpled with visible shame. The January air bit hard, even through the worn denim of my Carhartt jacket. My shoulders ached, a dull throb from 12 hours of hanging drywall in a half-heated condo development out past O'Hare. My hands, stiff and calloused, gripped the steering wheel of the old Ford, the heater core rattling its usual complaint. Chicago winters were not gentle, and neither was a carpenter's life. But I was on my way to pick up Sarah, which meant the day was almost over. Sarah's Buick Century had thrown its transmission last week, a $5,000 problem that sat in pieces at the mechanic's shop. For now, she rode the bus, navigating the crowded roads from downtown to our duplex in Edison Park. I knew how she hated the extra 40 minutes it added to her already long day as an executive assistant at Kellerman Pharmaceuticals. The thought of her waiting in the cold, even for a few minutes, was enough to make me bypass going straight home, despite the fatigue pulling at my eyelids. The Kellerman building loomed, a monument of glass and polished steel reflecting the grim winter sky. I parked the truck, its rust spots looking particularly pronounced against the sleek architecture, and stepped out. My boots, caked with drying mud and plaster dust, crunched on the clean sidewalk. My jacket, patched at the elbows, felt heavy. I knew I stuck out, a blue-collar ghost in a world of pressed suits and designer scarves. Inside, the lobby was all marble and muted lighting, the air smelling of expensive air freshener and ambition. A security guard, his uniform crisp and eyes sharp, watched me from behind a gleaming reception desk. His gaze lingered on my work gloves, tucked into my back pocket, and then on the faint sawdust clinging to my hair. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a fancy kennel. I moved to the side, trying to appear smaller, less conspicuous. I just wanted to see Sarah's face. The elevator doors chimed, and Sarah stepped out, her tailored skirt suit a stark contrast to my worn work clothes. Beside her was Arthur Thorne, her boss, and two other well-dressed colleagues. Arthur exuded a kind of smooth, effortless confidence, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his custom-tailored coat draped just so over his broad shoulders. He carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my truck. Sarah's professional composure, usually a shield, fractured the moment her eyes met mine. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. Then a small smile touched her lips, a genuine pleasure that warmed me, despite the cold air still clinging to my jacket. "Frank, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Arthur Thorne stopped, his conversation with a colleague faltering. His eyes, a pale, assessing blue, flicked over me. They scanned my mud-caked boots, my frayed Carhartt, my tired face. It wasn't a look of recognition, but dismissal. His lip curled, barely perceptible, a small movement of disdain. Without turning his head fully, without even granting me the courtesy of direct eye contact, he spoke to Sarah. "Is this your husband, Sarah?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken judgment. Then with a casual cruelty he added, "Does he even have a job? Your wife deserves better." The lobby went silent. The receptionist, who had been idly tapping on her keyboard, suddenly found an urgent task on her screen. Sarah's colleagues exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances before looking away. My stomach lurched, a hard, unexpected punch. My jaw tightened. A dozen retorts flashed through my mind about my business, the honest sweat on my brow, the calluses that paid our bills, the hands that built things. But I said nothing. I just walked to Sarah, reached for her hand, and held it. Her fingers were cold, but she squeezed mine tight. We walked out into the biting wind, the silence between us heavier than the chill. The truck's old heater began its rattling wheeze, trying to warm the cab, but it did little to thaw the frozen anger in Sarah's eyes. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her handbag. The 10-minute drive home stretched into an eternity. The moment the front door closed behind us, Sarah exploded. She dropped her bag, not even bothering to take off her coat, and began to pace the living room. That arrogant, prejudiced son of a... How dare he speak to you like that? To us? Her voice rose, indignation making her cheeks flush. He thinks just because you work with your hands, you're less than him. He just dismissed you. I peeled off my work gloves, trying to sound calm. Forget it, Sarah. It doesn't matter. The words felt hollow, even to me. It matters, she shot back, her voice tight. I'm going to HR first thing tomorrow. I'll report him. I put a hand on her arm, gently stopping her pacing. No, you're not. Her eyes still burning met mine. He's Arthur Thorne. He probably owns half the board. He'd find a way to make your life hell, or worse, get you fired. You know that. The pragmatic truth, cold and unyielding, settled between us. Louise, I am added, looking away. We need that health insurance, Sarah. For your mother. Eleanor's cancer treatments were a constant, silent weight on our shoulders, and Kellerman's comprehensive plan was our anchor. Later, long after Sarah had gone to bed, I lay awake, the image of Arthur's sneer replaying in my mind. His words, "Does he even have a well, your wife deserves better," echoed, finding purchase in a deep-seated insecurity I rarely acknowledged. Sarah, with her college degree and her sharp mind, her climb up the corporate ladder, and me, with my dirty hands and aching back, building what other people designed. I knew she loved me, but I couldn't help but wonder, in the dark quiet of the night, if she ever, just for a moment, regretted choosing a life with me. The biting edge of Arthur Thorne's words from the Kellerman lobby tried to follow me. Does he even have a dog? Your wife deserves better. I tried to shake them off, burying myself in the physicality of my work. The new custom bookshelf job in Highland Park was intricate, demanding precision. The scent of fresh-cut oak and maple filled the air as I measured, sawed, and planed. The repetitive motion of sanding, the satisfying fit of a joint, these were familiar comforts. But even as the sawdust clung to my hair and the wood splinters pricked my fingers, the insult kept replaying. It was a loop in the back of my mind, a quiet, nagging doubt. Sarah, usually open about her day, grew quiet about work that week. She didn't mention Arthur. When I asked if he was still around, she simply said, "Oh, he's been traveling a lot this week, Frank. Important meetings." Her voice was flat, a little too even. I didn't press it. I knew her well enough to know when she was holding something back. Life, meanwhile, kept moving. I started a new kitchen renovation, tearing out old cabinets, the dust getting everywhere. The biggest thing, though, was Eleanor. She began her first round of chemo that Tuesday. It hit her hard. Sarah spent most evenings at her mother's small bungalow on the northwest side, bringing soup, helping her navigate the exhaustion. One Sunday, I went over there myself. Eleanor's old shower was leaking again, a steady drip-drip into the tub. I spent an hour in the cramped bathroom, tightening the valve, replacing a worn washer. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, looking smaller, weaker, but watching me with a kind of quiet appreciation. I heard her later, her voice thin but clear, talking to Sarah in the kitchen while I packed my tools. "You've got a good one, Sarah," she said. "Your father wore fancy suits, and look how that turned out. Frank's the real deal." It was a small thing, a private conversation I wasn't meant to hear, but it landed like a warm hand on my shoulder, a quiet comfort against the chill of Arthur's contempt. Friday evening, Sarah met me at the door, her eyes bright, a smile pushing away the week's tension. "We're going out tonight, Frank," she announced. "Dinner. I'm celebrating." My eyebrows went up. "What are we celebrating?" "I got promoted," she said, practically bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Executive coordinator and a 10% raise." I let out a whoop, pulling her into a hug, lifting her off the ground. She laughed, a genuine joyful sound. It felt good to feel that kind of lightness. "Arthur called me into his office this afternoon," she explained, still breathless as I set her down. "He said my attention to detail, my organization, my commitment, they hadn't gone unnoticed." I tried to keep my tone light, to push down the lingering bitterness. "Well," I said, a small smile touching my lips, "he got something right for once." Sarah just shook her head, a familiar, exasperated look crossing her face. "We decided on Salvatore's, a new Italian place on the edge of Lincoln Park that had been getting good reviews. I changed into my cleanest jeans and my best flannel shirt, a dark blue one I usually save for Sunday church." I still felt underdressed next to Sarah. She'd bought a new dress, a deep emerald green that brought out the color in her eyes. It shimmered slightly as she moved, and she looked stunning, a beacon of elegance in the dim, intimate restaurant. The place was busy, filled with hushed conversations and the clinking of silverware. We were halfway through our pasta, talking about plans for the raise, maybe a small vacation when Eleanor was feeling better, when I saw Sarah's expression change. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening slightly, fixed on something over my shoulder. Her gaze was intense, still, a sudden, cold stillness. "What is it?" I asked, turning in my chair to follow her line of sight. Across the room, near a large window overlooking the street, sat Arthur Thorne. He was not alone. Beside him was a young woman, much younger than his wife, Mrs. Thorne, whom I'd only seen in pictures on Sarah's desk. This woman had bright blonde hair, styled in a fashionable, effortless way, and she was laughing, her hand resting lightly on Arthur's arm. She was definitely not Mrs. Thorne. Sarah's voice was a low mutter, laced with something like disbelief, something like fury. "Cassie from marketing," she whispered. "She's only been with the company 6 months." Arthur, as if sensing our gaze, looked up. His eyes met mine, then Sarah's. A slow, sarcastic smile spread across his face. He raised his wineglass, a half-empty goblet of red, in a mocking toast, a small, triumphant gesture. Cassie whispered something in his ear, and he chuckled, a rich, self-satisfied sound, his eyes still fixed on us, cold and knowing. Sarah slammed her fork down on the plate, a sharp clang that made a nearby couple glance over. "That absolute hypocrite," she seethed, her voice barely audible but vibrating with rage. "His wife is at the mayor's charity function tonight. I helped him pick out an anniversary gift for her just last month, a diamond pendant." I watched Arthur, still smiling, still looking at us. The arrogance was palpable, a physical force. "Don't let him ruin our night, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, my anger carefully banked. "He's not worth it. Not tonight." The image of Arthur Thorne smirking over his wineglass, Cassie from marketing at his side, burned itself into our shared memory. That night at Salvatore's, the anger had been a binding agent, a quiet indignation that passed between Sarah and me in a look, a shared understanding. We know what kind of man he truly is. It was a small, cold comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, Sarah seemed to channel that anger into her work. Her promotion to executive coordinator meant more responsibility, more projects, and inevitably more direct interaction with Arthur Thorne. She was determined, she said, to prove him wrong about everything. Her long hours extended further. I'd come home from a job, showered, and still find her hunched over her laptop, sometimes with a stack of files spread across the dining room table. I watched her, sometimes from the doorway, sometimes from the couch. She was growing, I could see it. Her confidence bloomed, a new assurance in her voice when she discussed quarterly projections or stakeholder engagement. She'd talk about high-level office matters with an ease that felt new, and I felt a pang of pride for her ambition, for her intelligence. But beneath that pride, a distant ache started to form. It was the ache of diverging worlds, her life growing more complex, more polished, while mine remained rooted in the tangible, the grit of sawdust and paint. She even started reporting a shift in Arthur's demeanor. "He's been different," she'd say over a quick dinner. "Less dismissive, even cordial. He actually praised my presentation in front of the VPs today. It was a strange report, given our shared discovery, but I tried to be happy for her. Maybe he had learned something. Maybe." Then came the work dinners and the late meetings. "It's part of the new coordinator role, Frank," she'd explain, rushing out the door. "Arthur, some other VPs, sometimes clients, important stuff." She'd often get home past 9, sometimes closer to 10, smelling faintly of expensive restaurant food and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I started noticing small changes. A new blouse, silk, a shade I hadn't seen before, a pair of delicate silver earrings, a different perfume, lighter, more floral than the one she'd worn for years, and a subtle shift in her guardedness. Her eyes, which used to meet mine with an open honesty, now sometimes held a flicker of something held back, a weariness I couldn't quite decipher. I tried to push away the creeping unease. I told myself it was my own insecurity, that old demon from the lobby resurfacing. Sarah was working hard. She was driven. She was doing it for her career, for us, for Eleanor and the crushing cost of her treatments. I trusted her. She was Sarah. One evening, Brenda called asking for Sarah. "Still got my girl all to yourself, Frank," she joked, her voice bright over the phone. "Or is Arthur Thorne hogging all her time these days?" I forced a laugh, mumbled something about long hours, and handed the phone to Sarah. The comment, meant lightly, stuck with me. Our own small milestones, the completion of a particularly tricky carpentry job, an anniversary of the day we met, often passed with me celebrating alone, or with a quick, rushed phone call from Sarah. "So sorry, honey, this meeting just won't end." The phone calls always came from the office, or sometimes from a car, the distant murmur of city traffic in the background. One night she came home particularly late. "Long dinner," she sighed, shrugging off her blazer. I went to hug her, and as my face brushed against her shoulder, I caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. It wasn't her new perfume. It was something deeper, richer, a masculine cologne, perhaps. I dismissed it. Restaurant smell, I told myself. A busy place, lingering scents from other patrons. But the subtle distance, the guardedness, was becoming less subtle. Fewer casual touches on the arm as she passed me in the kitchen. Less intimate conversation about her day, replaced by tired sighs and vague summaries. More exhaustion in her eyes. It was a slow, almost imperceptible drift. The initial shared bond over Arthur's hypocrisy, the righteous anger that had once felt so strong, began to fray. Underneath it, slowly and inexorably, the seeds of my own unvoiced suspicions began to grow. They were quiet, insidious, worming their way into my thoughts. Eleanor, fragile and pale after another chemo session, noticed it too, in her own quiet way. "Sarah's working so hard," she said to me one afternoon, her voice soft. "Hope she remembers to make time for what truly matters." Her words were a gentle reminder, but they felt like a quiet plea. Then there was the phone call. Sarah was in the shower, the water running. Her phone, buzzing on the counter, startled me. I picked it up, expecting to see Brenda's name, or maybe Eleanor's. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" I said. A click, a hang-up. No voice, just the dead air. Sarah, drying her hair, shrugged when I mentioned it. "Probably a telemarketer, Frank. They always hang up if you answer." I nodded, but the image of that blank screen, the silent click, stayed with me. The news came like a slow-moving storm front, inevitable and chilling. Arthur Thorne announced a major business trip to Singapore, a deal he'd been meticulously crafting for months. Sarah, as his executive coordinator, would be accompanying him. "It's a huge opportunity, Frank," she'd said, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and nerves. "A week, maybe 10 days, high stakes." I tried to sound supportive, to match her enthusiasm. "That's great, Sarah. Good for you." But a cold knot twisted in my gut. The thought of Sarah and Arthur alone together on a distant trip halfway across the world gnawed at me. The image of him raising his wine glass in that mocking toast, still too fresh. I tried to push it down, to tell myself it was professional. It was business. Sarah, however, was genuinely excited. She poured herself into the preparations, meticulously organizing itineraries, compiling reports, making sure every detail was perfect. She saw it as a monumental step for her career, proof of her value. Her dedication was admirable. It was undeniable. Eleanor, frail from her treatments, her voice a thin whisper, expressed her quiet worry. "Singapore," she'd mused, her gaze distant as I checked her blood pressure one afternoon. "That's a long way, honey. And with Arthur Thorne, too. Just be careful, Sarah." Her concern was a mirror of my own, unstated. The morning of her departure was a flurry of last-minute checks and hurried goodbyes. Sarah was dressed in a sharp travel suit, her carry-on bag neatly packed. We shared a quick, tight hug by the door. "Wish me luck," she smiled, grabbing her keys. "I'll call you from the airport." And then she was gone, the quiet click of the door echoing in the empty house. I went about my morning routine, trying to focus on the day's work. About an hour later, I walked past the kitchen counter and saw it. Her work phone, small and black, sitting innocently beside the fruit bowl. She'd forgotten it. A small wave of panic, then annoyance. She'd need this for the trip, As I picked it up, intending to call her personal cell and tell her, the screen lit up. Multiple notifications flashed across it, emails, calendar reminders, app updates. Then a text message popped up. It was from an unsaved number, no name attached, just a string of digits. Against my better judgment, against every instinct that screamed to leave it alone, a cold dread settling in my stomach, I felt an impulse, a terrible magnetic pull. My thumb moved without conscious thought. I opened the text. The words, stark and unambiguous, hit me like a physical blow. Miss you already. Can't wait for our room service tonight, my love. Think of me. The sender, Arthur Thorne. My world shattered. Not a crack, not a fracture, but a complete, undeniable implosion. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. The casual intimacy of my love, the explicit mention of our room service tonight, it was clear. Brutally, sickeningly clear. My fingers, stiff and cold, scrolled through other messages in the thread, a timeline of stolen moments. Hushed endearments, disguised as urgent project updates. Secret meetings, framed as late nights at the office. Work dinners that now made sickening sense. Can't wait for you to come over after your husband's asleep. Dates that aligned perfectly with Sarah's growing distance. The new perfume, the subtle guardedness. The proof was all there, laid bare in digital shorthand. The bitter irony twisted in my gut. A cruel joke. The man who had dismissed me, mocked my honest work, the man we had scorned for his affair with Cassie from marketing, was now having an affair with my wife. He wasn't just a hypocrite, he was a venomous snake, coiled in our lives. I felt no explosion, no shout of rage, just a cold, quiet fury that settled deep in my bones. A profound sense of betrayal, yes, but more than that, an emptiness, a hollow space where my trust used to be. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a brick of damning evidence. I knew Sarah was already on her way, probably at O'Hare by now, checking in for the long flight to Singapore. With him. I stared at the phone, the bright screen, a window into a future I hadn't imagined. And as I stared, a grim resolve began to solidify in my mind. The game had changed, and I would change with it. The week of Sarah's absence stretched long, each day a quiet, hollow echo in our duplex. I moved through the motions, a ghost in my own home, the silence amplifying the betrayal that hummed beneath my skin. I ate meals alone, cleaned the house with a methodical detachment, and worked on my carpentry projects with a grim focus. I didn't call Sarah. I didn't text. I just let the silence sit, pretending everything was normal, pretending I wasn't carrying a secret that was slowly solidifying into a weapon. I visited Eleanor as I always did. I changed a light bulb in her hallway, brought in her mail, listened patiently as she recounted her day, her voice thin but unwavering. She talked about Sarah, how proud she was of her, how much she missed her. Each word felt like a fresh cut, a reminder of the elaborate lie I was living. The weight of the secret, unshared, pressed down on me. During my carpentry downtime, the hours between jobs, I began to discreetly research Arthur Thorne. I sat at my laptop, sometimes late into the night, clicking through articles, financial reports, society pages. I learned about his investments, his carefully cultivated reputation as a business titan, his prominent, charitable wife. I remembered Sarah mentioning that Mrs. Thorne was on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation, a detail that now felt like a key, a small, cold piece of leverage. Then I found Cassie from marketing on social media. Her profile was public, filled with smiling selfies, posts about corporate events, pictures of weekend brunches. She seemed young, ambitious, entirely unaware of the full extent of Arthur's deceit, a pawn in his carefully constructed game. I studied her face, her bright, innocent eyes. A cautious, anonymous message formed in my mind. Not a direct accusation, but a subtle hint, a seed of doubt. I created a burner email, crafted a short, innocuous sentence, and sent it to her work address, something like, "Be careful who you trust at Kellerman. Some people aren't who they seem." It was enough, I hoped, to spark a flicker of suspicion, to make her look closer at the man she thought she knew. At home, I started to subtly gather small pieces of evidence. A receipt for a dinner that Sarah had told me was with clients, but had only 2 entrees. A discarded note with Arthur's scribbled initials and a time tucked into an old magazine. A small, expensive trinket, a keychain shaped like a tiny Singapore skyline that Sarah had brought home a few months ago, long before this official trip. I didn't know what I'd use them for, but I knew I needed them. Sarah returned from Singapore a week later, tired but radiating a new kind of energy. Her eyes, usually shadowed from the long flight, sparkled with triumph. She talked animatedly about the deal, the complex negotiations, the glittering city. I nodded, feigning interest, asking questions, every word an effort. It was a performance, a carefully constructed facade. I was unusually attentive, even kind. I poured her a glass of wine, offered to unpack her bags. I kissed her, a brief, feigned affection, feeling like a stranger touching a stranger. The internal turmoil was a screaming silence, but outwardly, I was the supportive husband. This was how it had to be for now. Arthur Thorne returned to the office a day later, the successful deal a feather in his cap. The company celebrated, the news making it into the business section of the Chicago Tribune. He was lauded, admired, his power solidified. He was untouchable, or so he thought. My first move, I decided, wouldn't be explosive. It would be surgical. I would approach Mrs. Thorne directly. Not with anger, not with accusations flung wildly, but with a quiet, devastating truth, the kind that leaves no room for denial. I called the Children's Hospital Foundation. Under the guise of discussing a custom bookshelf project for their new library wing, a charitable donation of my time and skill, I secured a meeting with Mrs. Thorne. The call was professional, my voice even, my intentions hidden behind the veneer of philanthropy. The meeting was set for 2 days later at a small coffee shop near the Foundation's downtown office. She was elegant, poised, her smile polite but distant. I offered her coffee, then calmly, systematically, I presented the evidence. The text messages on Sarah's work phone, screenshots I'd taken, the dates of the late nights matching up with Arthur's messages, the unusual keychain. I laid it all out, not with malice, but with a factual, almost detached precision. I watched the slow dawning of devastation on her face, the carefully constructed mask of composure crumbling, piece by painful piece. Her eyes, initially skeptical, widened with a dawning horror, then a cold, hard rage. There was no room for doubt. I felt no joy, no triumph, only a grim sense of having set things in motion. The first domino had fallen. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The seeds of retribution, once planted, germinated quickly. Within days, a whisper started at Kellerman Pharmaceuticals, a low hum of gossip that spread through cubicles and hallways like a virus. Arthur Thorne's affair was no longer a secret. The carefully manicured reputation began to unravel. Mrs. Thorne, though clearly humiliated, proved to be resolute. She filed for divorce, citing infidelity, and due to Arthur's public profile and the size of his perceived fortune, the news hit the local papers. It was a small item at first, buried in the business section, then growing with each passing day. The article detailed a prominent executive, a man of stature, caught in a sordid affair. The fallout at Kellerman was swift and brutal. Arthur Thorne was summarily removed from his executive position. His career, built over decades, was ruined. His reputation, once spotless, was shattered. The Singapore deal, once hailed as his crowning achievement, was now overshadowed by scandal, a footnote in his public downfall. Sarah was blindsided. She'd call me, her voice tinged with genuine confusion, sometimes even a strange concern. "I don't understand, Frank. How did his affair with Cassie get out so quickly and so publicly?" She still believed that was the extent of it, the only affair. She was a witness to the spectacle, not a participant, at least in her mind. Then Arthur, desperate and enraged, turned his fury on her. He called her, sometimes from blocked numbers, screaming accusations. He called her a traitor, a backstabber. "You told her, didn't you, Sarah? You told my wife. Or maybe it was Cassie, you scheming little..." He threatened her career, everything she'd built. Sarah, still confused, still convinced her involvement was a secret, denied everything to him. She would hang up, shaken, and then call me, seeking comfort, bewildered by Arthur's unwarranted rage. The irony of it, her seeking comfort from me while lying about her deepest betrayal, was a bitter taste in my mouth. Cassie from marketing, meanwhile, feeling used and discarded, saw an opportunity for her own retribution. She'd been contacted by Mrs. Thorne's lawyers. She, too, confirmed Arthur's affair. Not just with her, but with Sarah. She had her own proof, her own resentments. The web of deceit began to tighten. I let it all play out, watching from the periphery, my movements measured, deliberate. Then, one evening, after the dust of Arthur's downfall had begun to settle, I decided it was time. I called Sarah's personal cell. My voice when I spoke was calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil within me. "We need to talk," I said, "now." She came home quickly, her face a mask of confusion and frustration. "Frank, what is going on? Arthur's been calling me again, making these crazy accusations. He thinks I—" Her voice trailed off, her brow furrowed. She kicked off her heels, dropping her bag in the entryway. I didn't lead her to the couch. I didn't sit her down. I just stood in the living room, hands at my sides, and quietly laid out the evidence. The screenshots of the text messages from her work phone, the dates cross-referenced with her late nights and work dinners, the keychain from Singapore. The culmination of my discoveries, presented with the same cold, factual precision I had used with Mrs. Thorne. Sarah watched me, her confusion slowly giving way to a dawning horror, then a terrible recognition. Her face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade, the one she'd worn for months, shattered. She broke down, sobbing, confessing the full extent of her affair with Arthur Thorne. She talked about the initial admiration, the way he'd flattered her, made her feel seen, important. The slow seduction, the promises of a future where she would be more than just an assistant, more than just a wife to a blue-collar carpenter. The whispered words of encouragement, the sense of belonging in a world that had always felt just out of her reach. She explained her insecurity, her desire for something more, for the life she thought she'd lost by choosing me. I listened, not interrupting. The pain wasn't just about the infidelity, the betrayal of our vows. It was the depth of Sarah's deception, the elaborate lies, the way she had tainted years of our life together with her secret. It was the realization that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had been living a parallel life, one I was only now discovering. Sarah begged for forgiveness, her words tumbling out, desperate, soaked with tears. "I'm so sorry, Frank. I never meant to. I got lost. I wanted so much. I said nothing for a long time. The silence in the room was heavier than any argument, thicker than any accusation. It was filled with the debris of a broken trust, a shattered foundation, and the chilling certainty that some things once broken could never truly be put back together. Eleanor's health, already fragile, took a turn for the worse after the scandal broke. The stress, the worry for Sarah, the sheer exhaustion of her treatments, it all converged. Sarah was consumed by guilt and grief, her world collapsing around her. She was torn, caught between her dying mother and the raw, exposed wounds of her fractured marriage. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lease, I remained a rock for Sarah during Eleanor's final weeks. I drove her to the hospital, sat with her through the long nights, listened to Eleanor's fading stories. My personal pain was a dull, constant throb beneath the surface, but for Eleanor's sake, and for Sarah, I put it aside. We grieved Eleanor's passing together, a strange, temporary truce forged in our shared sorrow. The silence of Eleanor's small bungalow, once filled with her quiet presence, now echoed with a profound emptiness. With Eleanor gone, the stark reality of our situation returned, uncompromising and cold. Sarah had lost her job at Kellerman, a casualty of the scandal surrounding Arthur. Her name, linked to his downfall through Cassie's testimony and the lingering whispers, made her employment there untenable. The health insurance, the very thing that had anchored us through Eleanor's illness, was gone. Medical bills once covered began to pile up, a stark reminder of the financial stability Sarah had sought through her promotion, now vanished like smoke. Sarah was lost. The confident, ambitious woman who had flown to Singapore was gone, replaced by someone hollowed out by shame and regret. She wandered the house, sometimes just staring out the window, sometimes just sitting in silence. The price of her choices, once hidden in whispers and veiled glances, was now laid bare, undeniable. I looked at her, not just the woman who had betrayed me, but the woman I had built a life with, now broken and vulnerable. The anger was still there, a cold ember, but it was mixed with something else, a profound sadness for what we had lost, for the person she had become, and for the life we had planned. Days later, we sat down to talk. The air in the living room was heavy, thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of arguments never had and promises never kept. There were no easy answers. There was no simple forgiveness. Sarah, her voice quiet, almost hoarse, pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was an unsent letter addressed to Arthur. It wasn't angry, it was filled with regret, an understanding of the path she had chosen, the ambition that had blinded her, and the devastating cost. She had written it after Arthur's downfall, a cathartic exercise. Reading it, I saw a glimpse of the Sarah I once knew, the one capable of deep reflection. I acknowledged her pain. I could see it, raw and bleeding, but the trust, I told her, was gone. It was a chasm between us, too wide to bridge with apologies or explanations. I didn't know if I could rebuild it. The foundation was gone. Sarah made her decision a few days later. She would leave Chicago. She needed a fresh start, away from the wreckage, away from the whispers. She would take Brenda up on her offer to train in the real estate, in a smaller town, away from the city's unforgiving memory. I stayed. My work was here, my life rooted in the familiar rhythms of sawdust and construction, the tangible creation of things with my own hands. I offered no grand gestures, no false promises of reunion, only a quiet, aching acceptance of what was lost. We parted ways not with a bang, not with a dramatic scene, but with a quiet, aching acceptance of what was lost and what, if anything, remained. She packed her bags and I watched her go, a stranger walking out of the life we had built. I was left alone in the house I had built with my own hands, the lingering scent of sawdust, a reminder of honest work, and the bitter taste of a life irrevocably changed, a quiet reckoning in the heartland. The quiet of the house now held a different weight. Each creak of the floorboards, each sigh of the winter wind against the windows, felt like a judgment. I moved through my days, sanding wood, hammering nails, the familiar rhythm of my work a small anchor in the wreckage. But the certainty, the clear, unvarnished truth of what had happened, was always there, a cold knot in my chest. Emma was gone, off to start again, to try and build a new life in a smaller town, away from the choices that had unraveled ours. I stayed. Chicago was my home. My work was here. The life I'd built with my own hands was here. I had no grand plan, no desire for revenge beyond the quiet justice that had already played out. There was no joy in the fallout, only the grim satisfaction of seeing a man like Robert Blake stripped of his pretenses, and the bitter taste of knowing what it cost us all. Emma's ambition, her yearning for a different life, had led her down a path she couldn't come back from. And I, in my quiet way, had simply opened the door to the truth. The house, once filled with the warmth of shared dreams, was now just a house. And I, alone amidst the lingering scent of sawdust, understood the hard lesson. Some things once broken can never be fully repaired.